The world awoke to the thunderous echoes of a military operation that had been executed in the dead of night, a mission of unprecedented scale and secrecy. Dubbed Operation Midnight Hammer, it represented the largest single combat deployment of the United States B-2 Spirit stealth bombers in history. 7 of these spectral, bat-winged aircraft embarked on a journey that would test the limits of both technology and human endurance. They flew for 18 grueling hours, traversing continents and crossing multiple time zones, all while remaining completely invisible to the world's most sophisticated defense systems. Their destination was the heart of Iran, and their targets were the nation's most heavily fortified nuclear facilities. The sheer audacity of the mission sent shockwaves across the globe, forcing leaders and citizens alike to confront a dangerous new reality in international relations. The mission's origins trace back to a precipitous collapse in diplomacy. Tense negotiations in Geneva, aimed at curbing Iran's nuclear ambitions, had faltered and ultimately failed. The United States, under the Trump administration, had issued a stark 2-month ultimatum: halt all uranium enrichment or face the consequences. Iran, citing its sovereign right to a peaceful nuclear program, refused to yield to the demands. The deadline passed, and the world held its breath. The strikes began the very next day, a swift and decisive action that followed years of escalating rhetoric and proxy conflicts. The choice of the B-2 bomber was deliberate, a clear signal of American technological superiority and its willingness to project power across immense distances without warning, leaving little room for misinterpretation. The bombers launched from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, the sole home of the B-2 fleet, and began their clandestine flight eastward. The mission was not merely a long-distance flight, it was a carefully orchestrated ballet of logistics and aerial refueling, a testament to the meticulous planning that underpins modern warfare. For the pilots encased within the cramped cockpits, it was a marathon of focus and precision, navigating through darkness toward a destination fraught with peril. The world was oblivious to their passage. As they streaked across the sky, a silent and deadly promise, life continued as normal below. But in the corridors of power and in the homes of ordinary people in the Middle East, the failure of diplomacy was about to manifest in the most terrifying way imaginable. This operation was not just a strike, it was a statement. It was the second longest combat mission ever undertaken by B-2 bombers, surpassed only by the retaliatory sorties flown in the immediate aftermath of the September 11, 2001 attacks. The comparison alone highlights the gravity with which Washington viewed the situation. The targeting of Iran's Natanz and Fordo nuclear sites, facilities buried deep underground and protected by layers of concrete and steel, was intended to surgically dismantle the country's enrichment capabilities. However, such a high-stakes gamble carried immense risks. The world watched, not just because of the military spectacle but because Operation Midnight Hammer had irrevocably pushed a volatile region and perhaps the world to the very brink of a much wider conflict. The success of Operation Midnight Hammer hinged on one critical element: absolute surprise. To achieve this against a nation with a vigilant and capable air defense network, the United States military employed a masterful strategy of deception and misdirection. The operation began with a feint. As the 7 strike-bound B-2s prepared for their eastward journey toward Iran, other bombers from the same fleet were conspicuously dispatched on a different heading. These decoy aircraft flew west, on a highly visible trajectory toward Guam, a routine deployment path that would be noted by intelligence analysts around the world. This maneuver was designed to create a strategic illusion, drawing the eyes and attention of adversaries toward the Pacific, while the real strike package slipped away unnoticed into the Atlantic night. Once airborne, the 7 B-2s became ghosts. They maintained complete and total radio silence, a discipline that is exceptionally difficult to sustain over an 18-hour flight involving multiple mid-air refuelings. Every communication carries the risk of detection, so the pilots relied on meticulously pre-planned flight paths and timing, executing complex maneuvers without a single word exchanged with their command or with each other. This silence was their shield, as crucial to their survival as the radar-absorbent materials coating their fuselages. They were a phantom force moving across the globe, their existence known only to a small circle of mission planners at the highest levels of the U.S. military command. This level of operational security was paramount to ensuring they could reach their targets before Iran had any chance to react. The B-2 Spirit itself is a marvel of stealth technology, designed from the ground up to be nearly invisible to radar. Its flying wing shape lacks the sharp angles and vertical surfaces of conventional aircraft, which tend to reflect radar waves directly back to their source. Instead, its smooth, curved surfaces are engineered to deflect radar energy away, scattering it so that the return signal is infinitesimally small, no bigger than that of a bird or even an insect. Compounded with a special coating that absorbs radar waves and engine exhaust systems that cool hot gases to minimize its infrared signature, the bomber becomes exceptionally difficult to track. For the Iranian air defense operators on that fateful night, the sky would have appeared clear and empty, giving no hint of the devastating force approaching their borders. This combination of strategic misdirection, disciplined communication silence, and advanced stealth technology allowed the bombers to bypass layers of early warning systems. They flew undetected through international airspace and penetrated deep into Iranian territory without triggering a single alarm. The first indication Iranian officials had of the attack was not a blip on a radar screen, but the ground-shaking impact of the first bombs on their most prized strategic assets. The element of surprise was complete, a chilling demonstration of how technology can render even the most heavily defended borders porous. The ghosts had arrived, and their mission was only just beginning, leaving a stunned world to grapple with the implications of such a perfectly executed, invisible strike. The payload carried by the B-2 bombers was as specialized and formidable as the aircraft themselves. Operation Midnight Hammer marked the first operational use of the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP, a weapon designed for a single specific purpose, to destroy heavily fortified, deeply buried targets. Each of these so-called bunker busters weighs an astonishing 30,000 pounds, a colossal instrument of destruction guided by GPS to its precise target. The mission's plan called for the delivery of 14 of these massive bombs. Their targets were Iran's two most critical nuclear sites, the enrichment facility at Natanz, and the heavily protected Fordo fuel enrichment plant, which is built into the side of a mountain to shield it from conventional air attack. The MOP was the only non-nuclear weapon in the US arsenal capable of reaching it. Over a terrifyingly brief period of just 25 minutes, the skies above Natanz and Fordo rained down destruction with surgical precision. The 7 B-2 bombers, having achieved complete surprise, methodically released their payloads. The MOPs are designed to penetrate up to 200 feet of earth and 60 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating, creating a seismic shockwave that collapses underground tunnels and chambers, obliterating everything within. The objective was not to create a wide area of destruction on the surface, but to deliver a focused and overwhelming blow deep underground, neutralizing the core of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The strike was a showcase of advanced military technology, where lethality was measured not in explosive radius but in penetrative power. This technological prowess was the culmination of years of development, driven by the challenge of confronting adversaries who had moved their most valuable assets beyond the reach of traditional bombs. The use of the MOP in this operation represented a significant escalation in military capability, demonstrating that even the most hardened and deeply buried facilities were now vulnerable. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the world's nuclear watchdog, later confirmed that the strikes had caused catastrophic damage to the targeted sites, while they also noted that there was no detectable radiation leak, a small mercy in a catastrophic event. The message was clear. The technological gap in military power was vast, and the US had just demonstrated its ability to bridge it with devastating effect. The precision of the strike, while militarily successful, did little to mitigate the terrifying implications of its power. The deployment of such specialized and powerful munitions against a sovereign nation's infrastructure, outside of a declared war, set a dangerous precedent. It showcased a world where disputes could be settled, not through dialogue or sanctions, but through the application of overwhelming and technologically superior force. The very existence of weapons like the MOP and the willingness to use them fundamentally alters the calculus of international security. The clean, technological narrative of a surgical strike belied the violent reality on the ground and the profound instability it unleashed across the entire region, proving that even the most precise weapons can have chaotic and unpredictable consequences. While military analysts focused on the strategic success of Operation Midnight Hammer, the reality for Iranian civilians was one of sheer terror and uncertainty. In the cities and towns near the targeted nuclear sites, the earth-shattering explosions felt less like a surgical strike and more like an earthquake, a violent upheaval that ripped through the quiet of the night. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of confusion, panic, and a dawning, horrifying realization that the long-feared conflict had finally arrived at their doorstep. A teacher from Kashan, a city near Natanz, captured the prevailing sentiment of helplessness, telling a reporter, "Our future is dark, we have nowhere to go, it's like living in a horror movie." This was not a distant political conflict anymore. It was a visceral, life-altering event. The strikes triggered a mass exodus from major urban centers. Tehran, a sprawling capital city home to nearly 10 million people, began to empty out as residents fled in fear of subsequent attacks. Families packed what they could into cars, creating gridlock on highways leading to the relative safety of the countryside. They were not fleeing a known threat, but the terrifying unknown of what might come next. The fear of a wider war, one that could engulf the entire nation, was palpable in the panicked faces of those on the road and in the shuttered storefronts of once bustling city districts. Iranian authorities reported that over 400 people had been killed since the escalation began, a grim tally that spoke to the immediate and tragic human cost of the conflict. The psychological toll on the Iranian people was immense. The constant threat of war, amplified by years of sanctions and political tension, had now manifested in a direct military assault. Daily life was shattered by a pervasive anxiety. Parents struggled to explain the situation to their children, while the elderly recalled the horrors of the Iran-Iraq War, fearing a return to a past they had desperately tried to leave behind. The dream of a normal life of safety, stability, and opportunity evaporated overnight, replaced by a grim struggle for survival. The invisible wounds of fear and trauma spread far more widely than the physical damage of the bombs, afflicting an entire generation with a sense of profound insecurity about their future. This climate of fear was the direct human consequence of a decision made thousands of miles away. The narrative of a clean, precise military operation dissolved when viewed from the ground, where ordinary people were caught in the crossfire of geopolitical ambitions. Their homes, their livelihoods, and their very lives were suddenly at risk, transformed into collateral damage in a conflict they had no power to influence. The suffering of Iranian civilians serves as a stark and necessary reminder that the true cost of war is never measured in damaged infrastructure or strategic objectives achieved, but in the shattered lives and stolen futures of the innocent people caught in its devastating path. The news of Operation Midnight Hammer was met with a swift and near-universal chorus of international condemnation. The secrecy of the mission meant that even close allies of the United States were caught by surprise, breeding a sense of diplomatic unease and betrayal. At the United Nations, Secretary General Antonio Guterres did not mince words, labeling the U.S. strikes a dangerous escalation in a region already on the edge. He issued a dire warning about the potential for catastrophic consequences for civilians, the region, and the world, articulating a fear shared in capitals from Brussels to Beijing. His statement framed the attack, not as a solution, but as a reckless gamble that had pushed the world closer to a major conflagration, undermining the very principles of international law the UN was established to protect. The response from nuclear watchdog agencies was one of urgent concern. The International Atomic Energy Agency immediately announced it would convene an emergency meeting in light of the urgent situation in Iran. Having had its inspectors on the ground for years, the IAEA's mission was now thrown into chaos, its role as a neutral arbiter of the 2015 nuclear deal rendered moot by unilateral military action. While the agency was able to confirm that the initial strikes had not released detectable radiation into the atmosphere, this small piece of good news was overshadowed by the larger crisis. The attack had destroyed the very sites the IAEA was tasked with inspecting, making a peaceful, verifiable resolution to the nuclear issue exponentially more difficult. World leaders, particularly in Europe, expressed deep dismay. They had invested years in painstaking diplomatic efforts to build and preserve the Iran nuclear deal, only to see it dismantled first by the US withdrawal and now by direct military force. The strikes were viewed as a rejection of multilateralism and a dangerous embrace of go-it-alone interventionism. These nations now found themselves in an impossible position, caught between their long-standing alliance with the United States and their commitment to a rules-based international order. The diplomatic fallout was immediate, creating deep fissures within Western alliances and isolating Washington on the world stage, even among those who shared its concerns about Iran's nuclear ambitions. The overwhelming international reaction underscored a fundamental truth: violence begets instability. Rather than resolving the nuclear issue, the B-2 strikes had created a host of new, more dangerous problems. They had alienated allies, empowered hardliners in Iran, and set the stage for a retaliatory cycle of violence that would be difficult to contain. The global condemnation was not just a critique of a single military operation, it was a desperate plea to pull back from the abyss. The world was on edge, watching nervously as the diplomatic architecture designed to prevent such crises crumbled, replaced by the blunt and unpredictable logic of military force. The path to peace had become obscured, lost in the smoke rising from Natanz and Fordo. In the immediate aftermath of Operation Midnight Hammer, as diplomats exchanged condemnations, a powerful and passionate response surged from the streets. Citizens around the globe, united by a profound sense of alarm, organized spontaneous demonstrations to protest the military action and call for peace. In the United States, thousands of anti-war activists gathered in major cities like New York and Washington, D.C. They marched in front of the White House and through Times Square, their voices rising in a unified chorus of dissent. Their placards carried pointed and poignant messages: "Hands off Iran, no war for oil and diplomacy, not bombs." These protests represented the conscience of a nation grappling with its government's decision to resort to overwhelming force. This wave of protest was not confined to American shores, it was a truly global phenomenon. From the ancient streets of Athens to the bustling boulevards of Karachi, people from all walks of life stood in solidarity with the people of Iran, and in opposition to the prospect of a wider war. In London, Paris, and Berlin, demonstrators gathered outside U.S. embassies, demanding an immediate de-escalation and a return to the negotiating table. These were not just seasoned activists, they were students, teachers, parents, and retirees, all driven by a shared fear that the world was sleepwalking into a catastrophic conflict. Their collective presence served as a powerful counter-narrative to the official justifications for the strike, emphasizing a common humanity over geopolitical rivalries. The protests were a vivid illustration of a global civil society that refuses to remain silent in the face of militarism. They harnessed the power of social media to organize rapidly, sharing information and images that cut through the sanitized language of military press briefings. They shared first-hand accounts from Iranian civilians, amplifying the human cost of the conflict and fostering a sense of empathy that transcended national borders. This grassroots movement was a reminder that foreign policy is not an abstract game played by elites. It has real-world consequences that are felt deeply by ordinary people. The protesters were demanding accountability and a voice in decisions of war and peace, decisions too often made behind closed doors. The message from the streets was clear and unwavering: this path leads to disaster. The people's voice, rising from dozens of countries and in multiple languages, was a powerful plea for restraint and wisdom. It was a rejection of the idea that complex political problems can be solved with 30,000-pound bombs. While the B-2 bombers flew in silence, the response they provoked was loud, public, and resolute. These global demonstrations were more than just a momentary outcry. They were a profound expression of a deeply held human desire for peace, and a testament to the enduring power of people to stand together and demand a better, more peaceful world for all. The dust from Operation Midnight Hammer may have settled over the plains of Iran, but the political and strategic aftershocks continue to reverberate around the world, leaving a host of critical and unanswered questions. What is the end game? Was this strike a one-time message, or was it the opening salvo in a much larger, more devastating war? The lack of a clear, articulated strategy from Washington has created a dangerous vacuum filled with speculation and fear, increasing the risk of miscalculation on all sides. Hardliners in Tehran, feeling vindicated in their mistrust of the West, may feel compelled to retaliate, while regional powers may be drawn into a spiraling conflict. The world stands on a precipice, staring into an abyss of uncertainty created by a single night of overwhelming force. This moment carries haunting echoes of past military interventions that began with promises of precision and limited scope, only to devolve into protracted and ruinous wars. The justifications for the strike, preempting a threat, enforcing a red line, and demonstrating resolve, are chillingly familiar to anyone who has studied the history of the last several decades. We have seen this playbook before, and we have seen the tragic consequences it produces: regional destabilization, humanitarian crises, and the rise of new extremist threats from the ashes of conflict. The lesson of history is stark and unequivocal. Violence is a blunt instrument, not a surgical tool, and its outcomes are rarely the ones its architects intend. We ignore these lessons at our own peril. The urgent and overriding imperative now must be a collective and determined pivot toward de-escalation and dialogue. The path of war is a path to mutual destruction, one that promises only more suffering for the civilians caught in the middle and greater instability for the entire world. Real security cannot be achieved through the barrel of a gun or the bomb bay of a stealth aircraft. It can only be built on a foundation of mutual respect, verifiable agreements, and a relentless pursuit of diplomatic solutions, no matter how difficult or frustrating that process may be. The channels of communication that have been severed must be reopened, and the voices of reason and restraint must be amplified above the drums of war. Ultimately, the story of Operation Midnight Hammer should serve not as a testament to military might, but as a cautionary tale about its limits and its profound dangers. It is a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, the choice between war and peace is the most consequential decision any leader can make. The challenge before us is to learn from this precipice moment, to reject the allure of simple, violent solutions, and to recommit ourselves to the hard, patient, and essential work of building a more peaceful world. The future of millions depends on the choices we make today, at this critical juncture between further escalation and a courageous return to peace.